I start off with a wash of raw sienna and Gamsol, and I just mix this really, really, really thinly and just cover the paper in this wash. And I do this because the paper is white, and white is a very cool colour, and so it really helps your really light layers to give warmth to those really light parts of the fur. When you add white to paint, it naturally cools it, so you really want as much warmth as you can before you start. I like to work on the whole painting as I go along. I didn't always used to work like this. I used to work in sections, but my painting process has developed over time quite a bit. And I think the problem is when you work in sections and you leave white areas, your eye really struggles to judge what areas are correct in terms of if you've got a white section and then you've got a coloured section, you can't really see if it's the correct tone because everything looks a bit different next to the white. So you can only really judge all of the painting as a whole as you're working on it as a whole. And also you might find that if you have like areas that you haven't done, you might be working on an area and you think, oh yeah, that's really great, I'm really pleased with that, and then you go and add another bit in the white area and it throws off the area that you've just done, and you end up spending lots and lots and lots of time on this painting. And so it is, I find, a much easier way and much quicker way of working. So for your first layer, don't worry too much if it looks a complete mess. I mean, I never worry about this, and my first layers, they can look pretty bad, to be honest. But, you know, I like to refine as I'm going along. So I always think to myself, well, it can only get better. And I always think it's a good place to be in. If you're moving towards something that's getting better, then you're constantly pushing and pulling between something that looks a bit good, then it goes bad, then it looks good, then it goes bad. Whereas if it starts off, you know, pretty messy, it's always going to get better. So I don't worry too much about how it looks to start off with. So for my first two layers, I do use just the normal oil paint with the thinning turpentine. So I use Gamsol because it doesn't smell, but you can use any sort of turpentine, whatever you feel comfortable with. And I do follow the fat over lean method. So I start off my first two layers really quite thin, just laying the paint. On the second layer, I'm trying a bit harder to get the tonal areas a bit more accurate and get them to look a little bit more like the photograph that I'm working from. In the third layer, I move on to using linseed oil. I love using linseed oil. It's taken me quite a while to get the hang of it. When I first started using it, it was like disaster zones the whole time. My painting used to look like I'd eaten chips off it. It was very, very, very greasy. I ruined many a painting with just too much linseed oil. So don't feel bad if it takes you a while to get to grips with it. You just have to experiment really and try adding a little bit or adding a bit more, making your paint thinner, making your paint thicker. But as you move through your layers, you should always be trying to get thicker paint, more vibrant paint as you go along. So I get asked quite a bit, when is the best time to stop? How do you know when to stop? And it's quite a hard question to answer really, because the truth is it's very difficult. Sometimes I have gone too far and I think, oh no, I should have stopped half an hour ago. That's not as good as what it was half an hour ago. And really, the more paintings that you do, the more you'll get a sense of being more disciplined and saying to yourself, no, I'm really going to stop now, because if I carry on going with this, it's going to look complete mess. And you have to be very disciplined with yourself and not allow yourself to go into that territory where it's been overworked and the colours start to go muddy and it just doesn't look quite as nice and vibrant as it did. But we all been there, we all do it, and I still do it now. Every now and then I throw in a painting that I've just gone too far on it, and I think, oh no, I wish I hadn't have done that. I like to use flat brushes for doing the fur because I find that it gives a really nice expressive feel. And I think you should try really hard not to try and paint the fur as you're looking at it from the photograph, in that you're thinking, oh, I have to paint every single area of fur and every single brush mark has to show fur. Because the eye doesn't really see it like that. The eye doesn't differentiate each strand of fur, each hair individually. It's more kind of like a feel. When the eye looks at it, you have a central point of interest. So, for example, I usually maybe focus on the eyes or around the nose, and then everything else around that can just sort of blur, and you can make it quite swishy and quite loose. And that's really how the eye sees things. We can be fooled by looking too much at photographs. So it's really great not to study the photograph too hard, but to interpret it a little bit more. So I hope you've enjoyed watching my painting today. I try and post one every week. Please subscribe to my channel if you really like my artwork, and I'll see you again for the next one.